Okay.
Should we have a break?
Should we have a break and then we can have a chat with some spirits about those matters, eh? Yep. Friends, actually, who would like to talk to you about how they got rid of their false perceptions of themselves and their false perceptions of God, perhaps too. And then you can ask them some questions, if you would like. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So what we'll do first, though, is just ask them a few questions about themselves so you can sort of relate to their experience a bit, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure.
So there's two of us here who are sort of going to be the spokespeople, but we can call on others in the group who've had different experiences to try and help answer any questions or relay the experiences. We were quite drawn to and guided really here to discuss the idea about how we've given up false beliefs about ourselves and about God on God's way, on our path to God. So my name is Sage, and Sonia is also here. She's we're both females, obviously, and we are in the top of the seventh sphere right now.
Just before the transition.
Yeah, feeling very excited about that and happy. Yeah. So
really, you almost got rid of the very last of them. It's very good, isn't it? Yeah. So let's, if we can just ask a bit about your life on earth and things like that. That'd be good.
Sure.
Yeah.
So me, Sage, I was born in England in kind of the early 1600s.
Yeah.
And I guess my life on earth wasn't that happy. I died in my early 20s, and I was quite poor. I lived in a little village with my parents.
Yeah. So probably what you'd classify as an average life of that time in England. Yeah,
for sure. Sadly, I was actually murdered by my husband. So I had quite a bit to deal with about that, obviously, and my journey. And quite a lot of beliefs that I had that led up to me marrying that man, and also beliefs that I had after our relationship and after this sort of a violent death that I've had to work through. And for Sonia? Yeah. Okay. So she was born in Italy. Yeah. So we're a European contingent today. Not all of us in this group. Some people here were born in Egypt. Some people
some quite some time ago.
In Southern Africa, yes, like 1,000 years ago. Yes, yeah. So we're your more modern ladies. Yeah. And,
you're only 400 or 500 years. More than that, isn't it?
Yeah. But Sonia is more from the period the mid 18th century. So that's when she lived. And she had a longer life than me, much longer on earth. So she was in her 80s when she passed. She had a big family around. She just showing me the picture of everyone around her bed as she was passing, her children and grandchildren and
great-grandchildren.
Yes. So and yes, she had more of a sort of a traditional family life, and was more middle class, I suppose you would say, had some affluence in her life on earth.
Less trauma from a physical perspective. That's
right. And she had more of a sort of organised religious sort of experience on earth. I really didn't have that. I was probably more like a witch. Not a witch, but someone who believed more in the earth and the movement, the nature. There was a lot of those kinds of that would have been what you would call my spiritual beliefs.
Yeah, which I suppose were quite common in England in that time too.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not stand out in any way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But obviously, each of those beliefs, all of our spiritual, emotional, sexual and physical beliefs have all had to change as we've gone through our progress through the spheres.
Yes, now I suppose there's too many of them to mention, so perhaps if we focus on the ones you'd like to mention because you feel they're more apropos
to this
the group,
setting.
Or the setting.
Yes, all right. So for myself, Sage, and I'll let Sonia speak perhaps, or relay her message after me.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose there was a lot about gender issues, and that perhaps it's good to talk about here.
Yeah. So I suppose it's what do you mean by gender issues?
Yes, I need to explain that.
Yeah.
And of course, gender issues is quite a highfalutin term.
It's a modern
Yes.
it's a modern term.
Yes.
Partially that Mary and I have
Yes.
encouraged.
Yeah. And I sort of, I guess I feel a little bit playful being here today, so yeah. Perhaps need to be a bit more serious.
No, that's good.
So
there's enough seriousness in the room. Right?
Yes.
Everyone's really worried about
Everyone
this.
feels very worried, yes. And perhaps I'm trying to convey how enjoyable it is not to have these beliefs.
Yeah.
I feel quite happy.
When you're free of them, it's happy.
Yes.
When you're in the throes of dealing with them, not so happy.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So I had beliefs about myself as a woman and what I was deserving of.
Yeah.
So, and that was in all of those 4 areas that I mentioned.
Yeah.
So physically, what I believed I was capable of and what I believed I deserved.
So you feel like you were limited, like physically?
Physically limited,
Yeah.
and not entitled to have my own space, my own experience.
So the
my
level
own
of freedom of a man, not like,
that's right,
yeah.
in comparison to a man.
Yeah.
And
because you felt you were not entitled, it was an internal belief rather than, people had taught you that obviously, but it became an internal.
that's right. It was something that I carried with me into the spirit life.
Yeah.
It was something that was now a part of me.
Yeah.
It was a result of how I was treated as a child, as an adolescent, and then in my marriage.
Yeah.
But it was something that I had taken on as my own, as a feeling of reality.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's something that I would like to say to the group, is that a lot of the things that I've had to let go of, the beliefs, have felt like a reality until I was willing to seek God's opinion or an opinion beyond my own. They felt like this is the truth of who I am or how I am or what I'm capable of or what I deserve. Or
this is what is really happening.
this is what is really happening.
And what God I'm getting from God is just like, what do you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
That's not happening, this is happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, once I started to get things from God, it went a lot easily, more easily. Yeah. But that took a while because I had spiritual beliefs and emotional beliefs that God would not want to touch me, to put it in a very tangible, in a physical sense, but that God would not want to relate with me. God would not want to hear from me, or God just really didn't, when I passed, I didn't have any belief in an entity, God, and once I learned that such a thing was possible, or even potentially true, I had no sense that would be for me. That kind of relationship, because of how I had been treated by men in particular. I had a feeling that, well, God won't be, even if God wants to relate with other people, God won't want to relate with me. And while even in the earlier parts of my progression, I began to open up to the idea that God was loving, I was more open to those, to the idea that God was a great provider, because I had been open to that belief when I was on earth. But I didn't really feel that God would want to, that God would have an interest in me personally.
So that was on the physical level of life, in the sense of being listened to, heard, touched, loved, cared for, seen. And
also not feeling entitled to follow desire, to create space for myself, to be deserving of even a physical environment that was...
or even time to yourself, I suppose, too.
Yes. And on a sexual level, I was really very... the belief that I had was that sexuality was not a part of me. It was a part of men. And that I should just respond to
Yeah.
to men's sexuality.
Yeah, so either about making them happy or acceding to their demands sexually.
Yes, but I had no sense that I had that sexuality was even a part of me.
Yeah.
So that was a belief that I had, that it was absent.
Yeah. And historically there's been many women, hasn't there, who've had the same feeling that, like, sexuality is something men do and women just have to agree with it.
Yes, and that there was no... I've come to learn and experience that there was sexual experience and sexual pleasure that is mine.
Yeah.
And flows in me, is a part of God's desire for me to have that experience, that part of myself, and really our whole soul that would experience that. But I had no belief that was even an aspect of myself when I passed.
Yeah. And I suppose a line to that is your soulmate, and, you know, so you've met...
Yes, I've met him. Harry, yes. He's not where I am.
Yeah, is he on the divine path at all?
Yeah, gladly.
Oh, good.
Now,
good.
recent
event.
fairly recently,
Yeah,
yes.
you say fairly recent, how long?
Well, 100 years or so.
Okay. So it's 300 or 400,
not as long as me.
300 or 400 years behind.
Yes. No, but he'll move quicker than me. Yeah, he's in the force sphere now.
Good.
And
and obviously has your assistance.
Yes, and we have a beautiful friendship.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really wonderful to know him.
Yeah.
It's good. Of course, I knew of him and I found him when I was in the fifth sphere.
Yeah, because that's when you sort of started to deal with a lot of those issues relating to your sort of sexuality and also emotion.
Yes.
So,
My identity.
Yeah, regarding yourself as well as the opposite gender.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that was about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was in the first sphere then.
Good.
So you see, he's going really well.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
And what else will I share? Emotionally.
Yes.
So
what happened there?
Well, the emotional and spiritual beliefs were probably quite intertwined for me.
Mm-hmm.
So while I did feel like emotions were a part of life, a part of me, I didn't understand their significance in terms of how my longings created connection, created relationships, and how my emotions really impacted on my perception of God and my connection with God.
Yeah.
So I believed really that it's hard to describe in words, I suppose, but that I was very insular in a way. I didn't want, my feelings should remain internal, was my belief, and that I shouldn't express myself.
Or show them very much.
Show them. I had them in private, but I didn't feel like I was entitled to express desire. And of course now in the spirit world, we see, everyone can see desire. It comes out of a person and we see the power of it moving us forward.
And can you describe that for the audience here, because I've not experienced that. So you see it how?
It is something that you become sensitive to as you progress. You don't necessarily see it.
So when did you first see it?
Probably in the third sphere. Yeah. I could have seen it earlier, but I think that this belief system that I had really
not show it, not see it, and
not recognise it, and certainly not recognise it as a substance that was powerful, important within myself. And desire is, as you know, it should flow. Otherwise it doesn't really exist.
Well, it's sort of frustrated otherwise.
Yes. You're trying to contain something that is designed to come out. And so in the spirit world, your question was, what does that appear like? It appears like colours literally coming from the chest or from the head of a person. And the colour and the direction of that flow, is
aimed at the thing they desire.
Yes, and the quality of that desire is sort of shown in those colours.
So if it's a very dark, muddy, sort of reddish sort of colour, then it's an addictive desire.
Yes.
And then if it's a bright blue or sort of like a love-based one, rose sort of colour, then it's a loving desire.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And often the desires we direct towards God is like quite a light golden colour as well. Yeah.
Assuming that it's not based on religion.
Of course, the pure ones.
Yeah, that's
yes,
right.
yes.
Yeah,
As
good
we
idea.
progress.
So for people on Earth, that's sort of, but you still had to become aware that those things were coming out of you, and you had to want to see them before you saw them.
And I suppose, because we're talking about the beliefs that I had on Earth and how they affected me in the spirit world, because every belief, obviously, that I've mentioned, I had on Earth, and then when I came to the spirit world, there was work to let go of these beliefs.
Yeah.
So I had the belief that no desire should come out of me, that I wasn't entitled to want.
And did you know at the time that was based upon fear, or was it based upon your own personal constraints that you based upon yourself, or did you know at the time?
At the time I wasn't even aware of the belief. And then I gradually became aware of the belief. I was helped and guided. Yeah. And then I had to feel why I didn't want it to come out of me. So a lot of it was fear-based for me. Yeah. The fear of violence, the fear of attack, the fear of being told that I'm not worthy even. Yeah. And to some degree there was a shared belief that I wasn't worthy.
Yeah. Good idea. Okay, so that was, so with regard to the binding together of your spiritual feelings and your emotional feelings, obviously you're saying they're very bound together, which of course they must be, they have to be really, don't they, in order for them to survive. Yeah. So perhaps you could give a bit of an idea of that, like what it means that, let's say there's a spiritual belief of some kind, and what was for like you, with what emotions were attached to it, why some of them are so hard to give up for you emotionally.
Well, and I suppose that one about desire is it really affected my ability to long for God, even once I learned about God. Yeah. So this belief that God wouldn't want my desire, wouldn't want any substance from me. Yeah. And a lot of that was based in the emotions that I had around the fear of violence, the fear of self-expression, and but this is not what you're getting at. What are you getting at? Well,
sort of, in terms of, so with regard to the belief that God would not give you love if you asked for it, because that's really a spiritual belief, isn't it? That you won't be given it because you're unworthy. Mm-hmm. And then it's just a matter of, well, what emotions did you find, like you've mentioned already, what emotions did you find were attached to why you wouldn't ask for it, like with passion or longing?
Yes. Yeah. So I believed even that God would be repulsed by my longing. Yeah. It was not even, I had to work through the belief additionally that God wouldn't want to give me love, but even I felt that my desire was somehow harmful.
Sort of like you were obnoxious to God.
Yes, and a bit repulsive to God, so there was shame. Yeah. The shame-based feelings that I had about my own self.
And these weren't God's feelings, were they? They were yours.
Yes.
And that was sometimes it's hard to realise because you think at the time that, no, that's what God would think about me.
That's right. Yeah. That's that thing that I was saying at the beginning. I felt that was real. Yeah. I felt that God did feel that way. Yeah. That God did find me repulsive. And so I wouldn't dare, even because I was sort of open to this idea that God is a loving provider, if you like, I still felt that I shouldn't ask or approach or bother God. Yeah.
Now, just to help some people here, that was also linked to, wasn't it, how you were treated as
Absolutely.
Well? So perhaps you could say a little bit about that link.
Well, as a woman in my society, I was taught that I was not much more worthy than that I was, my worth was based on my ability to bear children and to tend to the physical matters of a family or a community, and that there was nothing good in me, that I should look to the men around me for how I should be, who I should be, and what I should do.
And what feelings did you get from other people about that? So, because they had to have been feelings, right, that you got? Not necessarily words even, but obviously you've got plenty of those as well. But that
I was lesser, that I was less entitled, And obviously, sexually, certain things happened to me growing up, and then in the context of my marriage, that also made me feel that I was quite repulsive. Sort of the shame feelings that I had, and so those feelings came to me from others.
So they were
that I was repulsive.
Yeah, that you eventually imbibed and began to believe yourself.
That's right.
Really what
That's
saying.
right.
Yeah.
So when I arrived in the spirit world, I thought that that was the truth about me. But in this process, I've come to feel through these matters and feel, no, these were the feelings that came into me from my environment.
Yeah, good eye. And so what are the things you found in the seventh sphere you've been dealing with? Maybe it might be a bit harder for everyone to understand, but it might sort of help a bit in terms of grasping some spiritual concepts that affect you in the seventh sphere.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, a lot about the infinite nature of God.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we learn about that as we come through the spheres, but coming
don't feel it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Mm.
Coming to emotionally appreciate the infinite nature of God and the infinite nature of God's love, and that I'm capable of expanding to receive more and more love. So that's a belief about myself that is changing.
Yeah, because you were feeling you were still sort of limited.
Yes, yes. And that there was only a certain amount of love that I could receive without almost, I guess, being overwhelmed, but almost that I couldn't kind of contain, that I would somehow disintegrate almost, even though that sounds a bit dramatic. But
well, I suppose you could say to become natural love, like to become the sixth sphere, you sort of do end up believing you've reached the limit now, don't you?
Yes.
And that's something that's really common in the sixth sphere, to feel that you've reached the limit. And so you still have this false belief in the sixth sphere that you're limited. And when you don't realise that God's love is available, you think you're going to be limited forever at that point, don't you?
I mean, I was fortunate that I didn't spend a lot of time in the sixth sphere, but there was still a belief about infinity, like an emotional, having to emotionally open up to that understanding. So working on that and working on just various beliefs about the nature of love. That's quite general, but the feeling that love has many, it's funny, isn't it? As you progress, you come to appreciate the qualities of God, and then the further you go, the more you appreciate the qualities within each quality of God. Yes.
Like you could say the nuances of the quality, don't you?
Yes.
It's sort of like the big
like
quality,
love,
like
God's love.
And then there's all these little, you could call them tentacles, I suppose, or whatever. That sounds a bit creepy. Aspects. Here we go. And there's literally thousands of them.
So gentleness, abundance, compassion,
affection, kindness.
Yes, and the
things.
infinite part of love, the eternal aspect. That love is quite it's a quality that lives beyond the original person's expression of it.
Yes.
And so these are very big concepts to emotionally imbibe.
To actually end up believing in your feelings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm just it's not Sage. Sorry, it's talking about accepting these things. It's about accepting them as a feeling, not as a thought, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and there's many parts of God's love, which, as we receive more and more of it, as I receive more and more of it, I come to understand love more completely, and obviously that helps me to love others more completely. And there's qualities to love that is very hard to put into a single word, but there's a sort of the combination of strength and passion with tenderness, for example. There's a sort of quality where that is together, but it's very difficult to describe in words. But these kinds of, that's a sort of emotional shifts that feel like a very refinement going on inside of oneself.
And these things must happen inside of oneself in order to become in alignment with God, don't they?
Yes, yes.
Without them happening inside of you emotionally, you can think them, but you're still not going to be in alignment with God. Yeah. Well, perhaps, and is there any other things you want to say before I ask anybody here who they want to ask you a question?
No, let's do that.
Okay, let's get focused on a question.
Sage, why were you not in the sixth sphere for very long?
Because I'd been fortunate to be educated about God's path, right from the first sphere actually, and so I wasn't very attracted to the idea that I needed to perfect myself throughout in terms of being the perfect human, if that makes sense. I was very interested in connecting to God right from the first sphere. And so that caused me not to be very attracted to the sixth sphere. But many of the lessons that people learn in the sixth sphere, I learnt some of them as I was sort of briefly there, but mainly in the lower parts of the seventh sphere, I dealt with a lot of those beliefs about self and love. Does that make sense? Do you want to ask more about that?
Can I just say a few things? It says, usually when you start to realise that progress isn't based upon you're developing your mind-based intention, you have a tendency after the third sphere to sort of almost go through the fourth and the sixth very rapidly, because you end up either learning a lot of lessons of the next sphere up in the lower sphere before you even go through that sphere, or you find yourself attracted back down to the lower sphere rather than wanting to live in the next sphere, because the next sphere's environment sort of feels a bit more toxic to not toxic, it's not the right word, but it feels
just it's not as attractive.
It's not as attractive because the emotion of it all is not there as much. Mm-hmm. So when you're in the fifth sphere, you got this ability to sort of develop your emotions quite a lot, and then when you enter the sixth sphere, a lot of people there, because the numbers of people there, which is, as these guys know, it's like many billions. Because of the numbers of people there, most of them are also very shut down towards their true feelings about God and also their true feelings about their potential as well. And so when you go there, you sort of feel like, well, this is not really suiting me now. I want to get through there as fast as I can and get to the next place where it will suit me better.
So, for example, there was lessons about perfecting my love of others in a moral sense that a lot of people learn in the sixth sphere. And I did spend time learning those lessons as I moved from the fifth to the seventh sphere. So briefly in the sixth sphere, but equally in the sixth sphere there are a lot of people who wish to ignore God's authority, to remain their own authority, to simply relate to others and not to God. But because I had already developed quite a lot of desire, which was being refined all the way, but quite a lot of interest in God and quite a lot of feeling for God's authority, by the time I reached the sixth sphere, I didn't feel very attracted to spending time in the sixth sphere.
I think I can can I
Mm-hmm.
ask? I think I can understand what you're saying, that the sort of people who are in the sixth sphere create the atmosphere of that sphere.
Mm.
But I am wondering why it seems that in the third and the fifth sphere,
it's
more spiritual or spheres where you feel about God more.
Well, because the atmosphere of those spheres is sort of similar, but in a lower sense. So, yeah, and perhaps I'll let her explain.
Yes, yeah. Again, I feel it's part of God's design, just that people with similar desires are drawn together more. And in each sphere, obviously, there are lessons to learn, but God is a great respecter of the will of humans. And so there are certain spheres in the spirit world where people who are less interested in God spend more time, they're still educated in love, but they have a tendency to enjoy their time in those spheres more. Whereas people who are more interested in God and understanding God and receiving God's love are more attracted to spend more time in the other spheres. It's sort of a way of drawing God's provision, I suppose, I see, where the law of attraction is at work, the law of desire.
Yeah, so very important to understand, says that the law of attraction is such that you are drawn to the people who you're drawn to, not because of some like undetermined or indeterminate reason, but rather it's because of what you're aligned with in terms of your desires and your motivations. And so a person who's in the third sphere, so there could be two people in the third sphere, one of whom is on the divine love path and the other is on the natural love path. And each one of them will be attracted to a completely different group of people. If you're on the divine love path in the third sphere, you'll be attracted to people who are a lot more emotional, a lot more working through their emotions, desiring to know about their emotions in disharmony with God's laws, desiring to receive more of God's love, want to talk about God more. They want to talk, they want to talk about God's laws more and all that. And then the other group are more focused on talking about more material laws, that govern their progress, moral laws. And so the conversation is completely different, the desires are completely different. And so you could say there's sort of two groups of atmospheres that persist up until the sixth sphere. One atmosphere is sort of more in alignment with personal progression in terms of without God, and the other is more in alignment with progression with God, right? And what you are attracted to is going to be dependent on what's really going on in your soul. So at the moment, many of you are actually attracted to the natural love path in your soul still. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Perhaps I could give an example, like in the fifth sphere. So I spent more time in the fifth sphere. And a lot of what every spirit who passes through the fifth sphere learns about is the nature of the design of their soul, and that there is another half of them, for example, and that they have a unique personality. That's the time in most people's progression that they really come to emotionally understand that they are unique, and there is one other half of them that is also a part of them that's unique, that the whole soul is unique to other souls. Some people learn simply that and continue quite quickly to the sixth sphere. Others of us, myself included, are more interested in the fact that God has designed it that way, and that God has a purpose for that, and God's role in all of that design, and God's desires for that design, which means that we actually spend more time in that sphere.
Learning about it.
Learning about those things. So if you like, you can still pass go if you learn the first set of lessons and get to the sixth sphere. Yeah. But some of us are more passionately interested in God's role in every part of it, and so we spend more time there. But then we pass go and get to the sixth, and then there's certain lessons that we must learn in the sixth, which is about perfecting our love of other humans. And for myself, I felt that because I was quite emotionally connected, I learned that quite quickly, and I could move to the seventh sphere. Whereas others who are less emotionally connected need more time to learn that, because they're doing it very intellectually based. So they spend more time there, and it takes them longer to realize that perhaps there's more to existence than just perfecting their love for themselves and others. And usually it's at that point that they start to then feel uncomfortable about whether or not God exists or how they should relate to God in a different way, but it takes them much longer. So that's why we spend different amounts of time in
probably good to say
spheres.
You can't enter the sixth unless you've perfected your natural love.
Yes.
So it's probably more correct to say
Yes.
that you have to do all of this before you actually make the final entry into that point. Does that make sense to you, sir? So you can't be in the sixth sphere unless you qualify for it. It's like getting a license. Yes. It's like getting a license. You don't get your license unless you pass the test.
Yes. That's true. I'm really talking about the transitions there,
Yeah,
aren't I?
yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But the transitions take quicker or shorter amount of time according to, so it's the same really when I was talking about the fifth sphere. It's sort of the transition between the fourth and the fifth that I was really referring to.
Yeah. So it's very interesting when you are there, because you are drawn to people who are sort of dealing with things the same way you're dealing with things, with regard to the sort of two ways of doing things. And that drawing together will determine for that moment who your friends are and who you spend time with, and a lot of other things are all determined by that.
And how long you spend in a certain region.
Yeah. And you'll find it's the same here on Earth, actually. There's the same laws applied here on Earth. So for many of you, the people you are currently spending time with are the people that directly match your desires, right? For many of you, that is the case. Some of you are not doing that, but the majority of you are doing that. And you don't realise you're doing it, but you are, because that's how the law of attraction works. Yeah.
That's why when you start a new relationship with someone who you think might be more loving and you feel quite uncomfortable, it's a good thing.
Yeah. If we come down to Elena, and then we'll go down, so we'll go back to Jade. So.
Hi, Sage.
Hi.
I had a couple questions about gender issues.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying you felt lesser to men when you were on Life on Earth. And did you also have a feeling that you needed a man to feel any type of worth?
I didn't experience really that I had worth even when I was with a man. So it's perhaps a little different to modern life on Earth. There wasn't really a sense of worth in my community for women, I would say. There was competition between women, and sometimes that revolved around who your husband was. But no, I didn't have that particular.
For the most part, treated like a possession.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you probably didn't have as many addictions with men as we do in the modern world.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the challenges of modern life.
Okay. Okay, so even without that, could you describe what it was like to kind of develop a desire to deal with this feeling of feeling lesser, this false belief
Sure.
because of your gender?
Yeah. That was actually the reason I raised it. It was very difficult, actually, and that was pretty proportional to the amount of pain that I had about the issue. So I felt quite resistive to looking at that set of beliefs about my worth in relation to men, my worth as a woman, because a lot of it did relate to my femaleness, if you like. And so it was hard. It was hard. And really from when because I passed, I was strangled by my husband. And obviously that's a very violent death. And I was quite traumatized. I was very frightened as it happened. But as a result, I was really met by people who were primed to help me with that belief from the beginning. But I wasn't very open to it at the time. I felt I just wanted to regain a sense of safety, and I could do that with some relatively small amount of effort to get to a place where I didn't feel like I was surrounded by people who would harm me. So when I passed, I was met by people who were able to, I was very fortunate actually, they just encouraged me to feel through the traumatic experience of my passing. And after that, I found myself in sort of the middle of the first sphere, maybe slightly higher, where I was in a position where no one was coming to harm me, but I still had a very bad opinion of myself. And I wanted to stay there. It felt so much better than my life on Earth. I just wanted to be there. I felt, and the reason I raise this is because for some of you now, I see it's very similar. You think, well, if I can just stay away from men, I just feel a bit better.
Exactly.
But you're not actually dealing with this problem of how you view yourself, and how you view yourself in relation to men.
Yeah.
So it took me quite some time just being in, it was probably the hardest transition that I made it was really the start of my progression, and I had to involve God in that process. It's quite a good memory for me now. I feel quite emotional about it because it really, it helped me a lot to be on the path that I'm on, which I love, which is God's path. But
can I just say, without God's opinion, it would have been very hard for Sage to want to work through the problem.
I would have laboured for so long, and as it was, I really believed it was true. In my emotional self, I believed these problematic beliefs about my worth, and it took very loving women who had already had a connection to God coming to me, and they didn't even try and tell me about God at first. They just tried to have me reflect and feel on what I felt about myself. To similar to what you were talking about earlier, to become sensitive to the pain that was already there inside of me about the matter. And once I had that opening, I started to feel the pain of that. Then they were ready, they were waiting for that to tell me about the possibility of asking for God's opinion. And because I reached a state that was quite emotionally raw and I knew that possibility was there, I asked for God's opinion. And I received some love from God. And while that didn't erase the beliefs in one go, it was the start of me seeing that my belief was a belief and not the truth. And that it was just something that I would emotionally need to let go of and keep seeking God's reality on that. So,
of course, the belief was related to her experience on earth, but now that she's in the new location, not needing to be kept either.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so obviously it required me being humble to a lot of the emotions that I had held on to from my experiences on earth. But having that first opening with God, being humble enough to feel the pain I was already in, and feel God's opinion, that helped me open up to experiencing all of those memories, if you like, from my time on earth, experiencing them emotionally and letting them go in favour of God's opinion.
And willing to go through them. Like, you can understand that you have to develop a willingness to go through what you know is going to be pain, in order to also have some faith that it's going to be afterwards that you'll feel relieved.
Yeah. But in that process, it's a wonderful process because it also gave me a sense of connection to myself. When you grow up in these belief systems where you believe that because you're a woman or because of something else about you, you are less worthy, you are less, you're not entitled to anything, your physical, sexual and emotional self is so squashed, you end up being quite disconnected from the very essential parts of who you are and your lived experience. And the beauty of me having to go back to these, what were some of them very traumatic and painful memories, is that not only was I releasing the emotions that were underpinning the belief, but I was also regaining a sense of myself that had been eroded through these beliefs and through these experiences. And so even though I would come through each painful memory feeling quite exhausted at times and having released quite a lot of terror and shame and grief, and that wasn't necessarily pleasant, but at the end of it I felt like, no, this is who I am and this is what I went through, and I am a person in and of myself who's had an experience. And that helped me open up to the idea that new experiences were possible because I was a person who had experiences.
And I know you were kind of like a pagan witch type person, but
no, really. Not really. That was me joking.
I'm joking with you a little bit. So did you see God, when you initially started thinking about him, as a dude or as like Mother Earth?
Probably when it came to, I talked about the fact that I had this sort of like God as the loving provider. That was more of like a feminine conceptualization, but it was intellectual,
Yeah.
I didn't have any like blocks to that emotionally, but it was really just sort of a lived experience, only insofar as I had lived on earth and was provided for by nature, but it wasn't really like an emotional experience of that. When it came to because my first experience and my beautiful sisters who told me about God, and they told me about seeking God's opinion, I felt that was going to be a man because I associated authority and knowledge with manhood. I associated power with manhood and masculinity, and so this idea that there was someone who had the power to tell me the truth, even I associated that as masculine. So it was very frightening at times to keep seeking God out. I had to, as I was dealing with the memories, of course, that helped me a lot to open up to God's love. But it was a man vibe, as you would say.
Dude vibe.
Dude vibe. Okay, one more question. I'm just interested in your personal story. Like, where are you at with your husband who strangled you now? Like,
yeah, I feel I've forgiven him. He is still in the hells. He hasn't shifted, but and I would love. Perhaps that's another time to come and talk about forgiveness, but it's very difficult to describe the liberation that comes from forgiveness. And it takes effort emotionally within oneself and with God, but the feeling of forgiving him, which happened for me in sort of the transition between the second and third sphere, because obviously a lot of what I had to work on was directly related to how, him being a man and how he treated me and him ending my life on earth. My physical life on earth, I was able to forgive him. That's quite a rapid forgiveness, just so you know, to do that so quickly. But it was so relieving. I felt that it opened me up. I felt like my progress really sped on from that point. But
before that time, the rage of what the person acted towards you remains with you.
Yeah.
And so that rage binds you both to the sphere you're in and also the inability to progress.
Yeah.
Wait, Sage's rage or her husband's rage?
Sage's rage about the injustice,
Sure.
of it.
Yeah.
Initially, it was hard for me to even connect to my rage. As I was sort of in terror, and then the preferred feeling was to suppress my rage so as to placate the male, I suppose, was the belief system driving me. But then when I could connect to my rage, that created, I was sort of drawn to him in my rage as well. And again, I was so fortunate to have good guides who could help me to see what was happening.
Because your rage binds you to the person you're angry with.
So you would go down to earth and you just be spying on him?
He was in first earth, but then when he passed as well.
Yeah, he was in the spirit world by the time I forgave him. Yeah. And so, going to his location, well, initially on earth, and I had a lot of resentment as well because part of his rage with me was that I didn't bear children, and he had children with other people, another woman after I passed, and so there was a lot of terrible feelings also about my worth and about jealousy and rage relating to that circumstance. And so it did take dedication on my part to stay with the feelings, to not, initially it was like not succumbing to the pull of my rage, but just having it rather than being drawn to him.
Because in your rage you feel desire to punish.
True.
And so you can feel rage without that desire, but it is quite tough when when you're in the location where Sage was in. She knows she could visit him anytime and act out her rage at him if she wanted to.
Yeah.
What's the difference there, feeling your rage versus feeling your rage and wanting to punish somebody?
Well, then you're not feeling your rage.
That was me trying to sort of avoid my rage almost by putting it on to him.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when you yell at somebody, you rant at somebody.
Yeah.
Whereas when you take yourself into your own space and just feel the desperate desire for power over the powerless feeling that I had at his hands.
It's really a desperate desire over your own feeling.
Yes. So the feeling of powerlessness and terror was what I was trying to gain power over through my rage. And so understanding that process and then being able to, I'm doing that action because it's like getting it out of you. And yeah, there was times in that process where I felt like I wanted to withdraw from God as well, because I felt that it was too hard or that it was just too much.
And unjust, you know.
Yeah. I couldn't see the justice in it. But eventually, you know, there were lessons that I learned in that process. Again, I had wonderful guides, and I began to feel that it was an issue beyond the injustice of myself. It's difficult to describe, but that there was beliefs that were in me because of injustice done to me. But also, as I was more humble, felt more, kept seeking God, there was more of a feeling of there is a mess. There is a mess between men and women. And this is something that I began to see how his second wife was treated, for example. I began to have compassion for that. And I began to be shown also how he had been treated. And there was lots of things that were gifted to me in that process, but it really required my willingness to not try to gain power over these feelings, but to work to have the feelings and to keep seeking out God's opinion. Yeah, and it was rocky for a while.
As it is when you're feeling bad.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for talking to us. Like, that was very inspiring. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you.
And we were over with Canna, was it next? If you remember your question.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. you kind of already answered it.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask about what led you to your first experience with God and what that kind of felt like.
Yeah. So you're right, I did really answer. It was through that the trauma of my passing and the pain of the beliefs that had been put into me about men and my relationship to men, really.
And the kind women who had already gone through
sisters,
similar experiences, who knew how to help her too, you know. So that has a big effect on you.
And did they keep you on track when?
Yeah.
So you had experiences with God, but then
and then
I come away from God.
That's right. And the power of because they had received God's love, and then their love for me was the initial thing that helped me be sensitive to the pain that I was living in, thinking that I was comfortable, which is something else you talked about today, isn't it? You know, I'd entered that place in the first few where I thought, now I'm in a place of relative comfort, much more comfort than I've had before.
I'm at least safe.
I'm safe, and nobody's bothering me, and I don't feel afraid for my life all the time. So that felt great to me, and I didn't want to go anywhere else. But them coming to me and the love that they had for me and the feeling that the compassion that they had for the pain that I was even denying is such a gift. It was such a gift to me. And me becoming sensitive to that pain then they helped me then see I could open up to God. But you're right, they became my guides. And there's 3 of them actually, and they're still very dear friends. They're celestial spirits now, and they would keep me on track, as you say, but only when I asked. You know, I made a lot of mistakes
And had a sincere desire, you know, to grow as well.
They didn't come and track me down and tell me off and tell me I should get back on this other path. They let me do what I wanted, understanding that my experience of my free will had been very suppressed. And that it was important for me to engage my will and to understand it as something under my control and my responsibility. And so they let me make mistakes, but the power of their love for me was like imprinted some way through that first experience, and so I knew I could ask for them, and they all would always come and help me.
Thank you.
Jada was next.
Mine got answered.
You got answered. Okay, Robert, over this side, please.
So I was just wondering about the qualities that men can develop on Earth that will prevent this situation from happening.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you got some advice or...
Sure, Robert.
I'm finding it hard to speak, so...
Yeah, I
Good
understand.
question. though.
It's the desire that you have that drives the question is a very beautiful thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so may I express my appreciation for that on behalf of many women and men. Yeah, but for men, it's, as I see now, it's not an easy thing to let go of the feelings that drove their abuse of me, because men have for centuries been raised with the idea that they are entitled, that they are the people who have more worth. It's no less a thing to let go of that, actually. In fact, I watch men really struggle under those beliefs because they are beliefs that have been imbibed. So as much as possible when you're on earth, to seek God's opinion about these matters, to seek to feel that God is not just male but also has a feminine aspect, to feel why we resist God's feminine nature, for example, why a man would resist God's feminine nature, to feel your fears about women. Many men hold on to these beliefs because they're actually quite afraid of not abuse at the hands of women, but what they will feel if they don't have the love or control over a woman. What they perceive as love is often control over women. To become sensitive to the true nature of your attitudes towards women is very important. And to feel also how both men and women have harmed you in these ways. As Jesus referred to earlier, many men are raised by women who teach them these beliefs. And so it's often complicated as well. They live with, if they live with a father, their father has this belief about himself, and often their mother encourages these beliefs or instills these beliefs even more than fathers. So, but you have the most powerful thing, Robert, in that you have a desire that it no longer happen. And that, as Jesus said earlier, the desire is the biggest thing that will lead you through everything that you need to deal with in order to eradicate the beliefs. Because it is beliefs that cause the terrible treatment of me on earth and the terrible treatment of so many women on earth at the hands of men.
Which is still occurring.
They're still occurring, and it's something...
It's just a sort of different flavour to it, but it's still happening.
But there is so much violence happening towards women on earth at the hands of their husbands, very often partners, what we would call a husband.
Fathers.
Yeah, the men closest to them. Yeah.
It's quite sad. I like your question too, Robert, because without the desire to personally change something within yourself about it, it's going to be unlikely you can teach other men how to change it. You know what I mean? And for most men, it is something that they don't even recognise about themselves that's in them at all. You know, like the average man we meet, still teaching, has no idea how extreme their feelings towards women actually are.
Yeah, so just like I arrived sort of almost completely engrossed in my beliefs as someone less worthy as a result of me being a woman, but completely oblivious of those beliefs really and how they were impacting me. On the opposite side, the majority of men arrive in the spirit world with the opposite injuries, beliefs completely oblivious to them existing and how much they're impacting on their life, their experience.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Sage about your mum, you know, what beliefs she had actually had that reinforced that. But you've kind of just a bit spoken about that. But if you had something more to say about that, that would be great. But my other question was, you know, when you said that you felt you got to a place where you felt safe in the first sphere, so you had been feeling unsafe in the first sphere for a while, yes?
Well, yes. Well, I felt unsafe all through my life on Earth.
Yes.
And then I felt very, very unsafe at the time of my passing.
Yes.
And then I felt, when I entered the spirit world, I was still engrossed in that the emotions of my passing, which felt terrifying and unsafe. And then, but some women remain in that state and really attract more abusive people to them. I was very fortunate in that quite quickly I moved to, I was encouraged again by my sisters to feel that passing experience, and I very quickly arrived. So almost, not seamlessly, because it took me some time to experience those feelings, but very soon afterwards.
So it was their influence, their help.
Yeah.
Not just that, like Sage also had the desire to feel her terror rather than act upon it or live in it. She wanted to release it from herself rather than to stay in the false belief of it. So she could have chosen, as she said, to stay in the false belief, and that would have meant she would probably stay in the hellish condition, attracting more abuse for many, many years, and perhaps centuries.
Those helpers would have been trying to help all those other women.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
And that was what I spoke about initially. I did have a relationship with my emotions where I did allow them to flow like in private internally. I just had a lot of problems with the expression in relationships and the expression of my desire, but I hadn't reached a place. I was relatively young when I passed as well. I hadn't reached a place of stiffness and rigidity, hardness inside of myself emotionally, which did help me.
I suppose you could say she was in a place where she was prepared to feel her feelings in private, but too scared to feel them in public.
And
for obvious reasons.
Too scared to express desire or you know, vivation. That's something I enjoy about myself now, is that I feel quite you know, open and
passionate,
excited and happy to show that, But initially I didn't have that feeling. And as regards to my mother, she held a lot of the same beliefs that I held. Towards women about herself.
Not towards men.
She was less.
She didn't feel the same way. Her mother didn't feel the same way towards women as she did towards men. So in other words, she didn't feel all of her children should be suppressed. She felt the daughters should be. Females.
And I came from a family of 8 children, so there was I had brothers and sisters, and all of the women, all of my sisters and my mother, we laboured for the household.
Okay, very next. Yes, let's go up to Brittany up the back, and then we'll come down to Nina.
Hi Sage, thank you for coming and talking to us.
Good to meet you.
I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about that aspect of your false beliefs that you spoke about before, when you first came to the spirit world and you had the feeling that your desire towards God would repulse God.
Yes.
And your process of working through that, I suppose.
Sure. So, I suppose my first experiences with God, I was in sort of a desperate place, and I was able to receive some love from God initially, which really helped me to sort of solidify a desire, I suppose, to create this relationship with God and to follow God's path. But that didn't mean that I was suddenly without any of those beliefs you're referring to, that somehow God would find me repulsive. a lot of that related to the beliefs I had about how it had to do with some sexual shame that I was carrying from experiences in my life on earth, that when I had, when I had experienced some sexual desire in my sort of early adolescence, I had been quite abused by that person. So I had sort of felt a sexual attraction to somebody in my community, and he exploited that, and he raped me and abused me. And then I felt very ashamed about that. I felt very badly about that. And also, obviously, within my family environment, I was taught that anything that I wanted, I was undeserving of. So both of those things, and of course, then I had the marriage to the man who was quite angry at me all of the time. So because I had this feeling that God was masculine, and because then I decided I wanted to try to connect to God and grow towards God, then I came this understanding that prayer is about longing and desire for God's feelings for me. And I felt, because of those experiences, my belief was God would find me yucky, because I found me yucky, and a lot of the men around me found my expression yucky. So that was a lot of grieving. Engaging with this, I was taught by, again, my very loving sisters, that what prayer was, the nature of prayer. And because I experienced it very briefly when I first received God's love, I had some experience with it. But then I spent a lot of time really, I suppose, opening my heart to God in a sense of longing, and being overwhelmed by shame, grief, a feeling that I shouldn't do it, that God would be repulsed, as I said. And I didn't receive God's love initially in that process, because really my prayer wasn't really going very far. But it was just the idea of longing, and the understanding of what was required would be enough to bring up all of this grief and all of these feelings of a lack of faith that I could ever be loved, and that my self-expression would ever be well received and not punished and not told it was yuck. Does that answer? Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
So it was about humility to the feelings that I had, but the understanding also of what was required, and I did want a relationship with God principally, but emotionally I had a lot of grief to clear before I was really willing to experiment sincerely. And then as I started to receive God's love, as I became more sincere, more of that shame would come up, and more of that grief would come out of me as I began to receive God's love, because obviously the experience was different to what I imagined it was going to be.
Brittany, when people treat you badly, they must have a feeling that you deserve it. And so when you are treated badly, generally, if you receive that treatment, you will eventually believe that you deserved it some way or another, that it happened to you because of something wrong with you. Because the people who perpetrate these kind of crimes towards another all believe they are righteous and you are not, in order to perpetrate the crime. So they believe, so a man who rapes a woman has to believe that she deserves it, because otherwise he wouldn't do it. Does that make sense? It's not his fault, it's hers.
Yeah.
Is what he has to believe. And so eventually if you're in the receiving end of that, you're going to feel, as a part of those feelings, that it is your fault. And if you then have that feeling, you can see now, when it comes to your relationship with God, you believe that everything that's not happening there is all your fault too. You see?
Yeah, and so was the original thing that drove you getting into those feelings, were you praying, or were you just more aware from having received a bit of God's love that it was something you needed to feel, or?
No, it was more that I understood that in order to know God, I needed to pray. I needed to long to God. I needed to express desire towards God. So I needed to pray, but so I would go to pray, if you like. I would attempt to pray, and then I would be overcome with the feelings of
I'm not good enough.
not good enough, God won't like me, I'll be abhorrent to God, I will be unpleasant, I am unpleasant, and because I was learning about how to feel at that time and the importance of it, and the importance of how my earth experiences were affecting these beliefs, then I would allow myself to feel about those things. But I was quite dedicated with myself about the necessity of prayer. So even when I wasn't receiving God's love and I was just feeling I need to pray and these feelings would overwhelm me, I would feel those feelings and then I would go back to the sort of trying to pray, and then I would feel more, and eventually I did that enough that my longing could leave my heart, if you like, and reach God, and I started to receive God's love then.
It's similar to what we described with Ganon earlier, just there has to be a desire coming from yourself, doesn't there, for you to even contemplate praying. But every time you attempt it, there's also the unhealed emotions that you have within you that also get triggered as a result of you trying to open your heart to pray. And so it has the net effect of also triggering some emotions that you've got to address in order for the longing to be pure.
Yeah. The issue that lots of people have is that they let themselves off, if you like, from, as Jesus would say, let yourself off the hook for praying. Yeah.
It's like, I feel too bad when I pray, so I'm not going to pray.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Or I'll have to feel this false belief about myself when I even think about praying, so I'm not going to do that.
Or I have to be told by God that something about me is wrong, so I don't want to hear that, so I don't want to pray. That kind of thing. There's a lot of emotional reasons why we might not want to sincerely pray, and most of them are connected with the fact that we don't want to feel or hear things about ourselves.
Yeah. And I don't actually know how else I would have dealt with that. I'm sure my brothers and sisters on the natural love path who have dealt with it have done it in different ways, but to me it seems the most time efficient and effective way to really rid yourself of the belief that you are somehow unpleasant or repulsive.
Yeah. Generally a woman who passes in Sage's condition, where she's been harmed on earth and murdered and sexually harmed as well, generally if she progressed without God, she'd probably take 1,000 years or more to do that, because there's just so many emotions involved, and so tough emotions too. Lots of injustice feelings and a lot of rage develops as well. And so generally a person doing it without God would take a long time to deal with just what many people on earth think of the average experience of a girl on earth, Yeah.
And many of you have my compassion, because I can see how many of you have women around you who haven't progressed from the place that I was in. Instead, they've come back to the earth to try to influence you to stay in the belief of not trusting men, in the belief that this is, in their false beliefs that they are impressing upon you.
Their beliefs they think are true. They think, I couldn't trust man. A lot of the men are untrustworthy. Look at them all. They're all still doing the same thing. So then they want to get into contact with other women and protect the other women is what they're thinking. And then they want to sort of influence the other women. Don't you go having a relationship with that guy. Don't you deal with anything inside of yourself about men. You've got to stay angry with them, because if you don't stay angry with them, you'll let them in, and things are going to go bad, That kind of feeling. It gets projected at many, many women, even though those women in modern circumstances may not have experienced the same experience that they have, the ones that have passed have.
Yeah. And the world needs people who are willing to lead in terms of healing these issues between men and women. And while I point out that many of you women have women who've passed in a state of terror or rage around you who influence you to remain close to men, and most of you men have around you men who wish to take power over women in spirit form. These men are around you. There are also many of us who have worked through these issues who would love to assist you, who would love, if you had a different aspiration, we could be guides to yourselves on these matters, and you could begin to lead the world in this very important work of healing the issues between men and women while everyone is still on earth, because that will be truly powerful. And from where we are in the seventh sphere, we can see that time is coming, but it does rely on the individual wills of certain people wanting to do that and wanting to receive the inspiration from people who have dealt with these issues in the spirit world, not those who are still engrossed in them, in their false beliefs and living them out as reality and telling you that they're reality.
Mm. Yeah. If you believe as a woman that you're protecting yourself, then you're going to very strongly attract women in the spirit world who want to assist you in your self-protection, in the illusion that you can't really deal with these problems while you're on earth. Right. So, but if you are willing to go through feelings that you have about lack of safety, lack of security, lack of sexual safety and security, and you're willing to actually go through those feelings, you'll attract a group of spirit women who know that you can also be sexually safe and secure even while you're on earth.
The people who believe in taking power over others, this may sound trite, I understand, but they really only have power while you give it to them, while you believe what they believe, that they are more entitled. Now, I didn't come to this recognition simply by hearing someone tell me that. I had to work through a lot of feelings. But I say it only because that's the potential for you as well, to understand emotionally that no one is more entitled or more worthy than the other, and more entitled to power or control or physical, emotional or sexual or spiritual happiness and fulfillment. No one is more entitled than the other.
Yeah, and an example of that is for many of you ladies that have had children, you have taught your sons the very thing that is going to cause damage to the next generation of children, right? And the next generation of women. The very thing that has caused you damage, you've actually taught to your sons and given them the feeling that they are superior. And that then goes on to the next generation. You imagine if you had dealt with that, then not only would you feel quite secure and not worried, not concerned about sexual dangers and physical dangers from men, but you would also teach your sons through, whenever they started to exercise an attitude that would have been out of harmony with that, you would have corrected them, right?
This is the power of dealing with these beliefs on earth, is that you have the capacity to affect generations of people on the earth before they even enter the spirit life, and really reduce a lot of pain, needless pain and suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beliefs create so much pain and suffering, don't they, Jesus?
Yeah. That's why last time on the last trip we were talking like, forget about your emotions to a degree. They're just things you're going to have to feel. Focus on your false beliefs, because they're the things that drive many of your bad feelings, are driven by those beliefs. And also, if you just give up a few bad feelings, many of your beliefs will also be given up. So, and your beliefs are powerful. They're what, remember we said earlier, that's what drives your desires, right? So if you have false beliefs, you're going to have bad desires, So it's just a song that came to mind, though. I won't sing it all. Yeah, so
Sing away.
Sage heard my thoughts, so she thinks it's funny. But anyway, it's good to hear the different experiences to see what a person needs to address, right? In terms of how these different experiences block you taking action or having desire towards God. So if any of you still had questions, so we'll just stop for a moment so Rob can walk down the front. So good.
All right, so I'll get her to come back. She did go.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if she.
And that's fine too if she doesn't want to.
No, she's happy too, but she's also sort of like saying that there's quite a lot of power in what she already shared.
Yeah, and doesn't want to water down the power of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
We get off into little.
Well, let's not do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. And just one thing I'd like to say to you, Robert. It was really lovely, that expression you have. It's very rare on earth to find a man who even feels it long enough to even feel that way. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, this is why, you know, Sage felt complimentary of the feeling. Because you know, for every damage that's done to somebody, there has to be a person doing the damage, doesn't there? Like, so for every rape, there has to be a rapist. For every murderer, there has to be a murder. You know, for every murder, there has to be a murderer. You know, and quite frequently, when we examine situations that have happened on Earth, quite frequently what we do is we examine it from the perspective of the person being harmed, but we don't ever see what emotions are in the persons who are harming. And this is one thing I do notice about many of you still as a group, is you have no idea how harming some of your feelings are, and also how harming some people's feelings towards you are. And you know what I mean? Like, when there's a lack of desire to actually know the truth about feelings and know the truth about beliefs and how they influence everything, there is also generally a lack of desire to know what the causes of such things are. And without desiring to see the effects fully, you can't see the causes either. And so you end up in this situation where, you know, it's well known on earth, isn't it, that violence towards women is a problem. But what, if anything, is anybody doing about it? Because for the most part, very little is done about the emotions of men towards women.
Very little.
For the most part, hardly anything is done about. There's a lot of things. There's some things being done to curtail the behaviour of men, right? But very little, if anything, being done to deal with the emotions of men as to why they feel the way they do towards women. And you know, this is what I see a lot on earth as a big problem, is that we can identify that there are problems. You know, wars, other issues, lots of problems. We can identify them. But the solutions proposed by the majority of people are all to do with taking action and very little to do with feeling emotion and feeling beliefs. And yet the emotion and the beliefs are the reasons why the actions are taken.
Mm-hmm.
And for this reason, almost every problem that's currently on earth is not going to be solved using the current methods people are trying to use. Right? And it requires a shift in people emotionally for a change to occur. And it requires a shift of their beliefs in order for them to even deal with their emotions. And so it's very important to understand, for everybody, whoever hears God's truth, it's very important to understand, dealing with your emotions is the only effective, and your beliefs that are attached to those emotions, is the only effective way that change will be achieved. Every other method you choose will not work. Because we've had thousands of years choosing these other methods and none of them have worked. You know, we've still got very much the same problems as they were when Mary and I were first here on Earth, like 2,000 years ago. Very much the same problems. So unless there is an emotional change and a belief-based change that actually affects you emotionally, that you actually go through emotionally, fundamentally, change will not be possible. So you've got to give up the idea that you can force change, that you can control change, that you can stoically avoid things that are bad and only stoically do the things that are good. All of that is not going to be possible. None of that is going to cause a substantial change. To cause a substantial change with regard to the intergender issues, the attitudes and emotions and beliefs of each gender need to be addressed. And unless they're addressed, there will be no substantial change.
Yeah, and I thought Sage's comment to Robert about the fact that the desire would lead him and others through that emotional process of change.
To seek it.
To seek it
Yeah.
is almost the most powerful part of it. Actually wanting to go through whatever's necessary to stop these problems happening.
Correct.
To go through it emotionally.
Yeah. And the average man on earth does not want to do that. And many of you guys, we meet many of you, you don't want to do it either. You know, it plays out in your relationships constantly. It plays out in your ways you treat women sexually and emotionally constantly. The way you look down upon women's abilities and beliefs constantly. And, you know, unless there's a desire in you to change that, you're going to pass into the spirit world with the same problems and also not believing they're problems. So the biggest issue when you pass is not that you have problems, it's that you believe you have them. That's the biggest issue. And the more you can face the problems you actually have on earth and pass not in the state where you think you're free of, but pass in a state where you're starting to recognise them, the more open you're going to be to the assistance you get to change them. But if you believe you have no problem, you're not going to seek solution to those problems. And when it comes to the treatment of women, most men do believe they don't have any problems. And that's a big thing that needs to change.
Even if they acknowledge other men have problems with it.
And nowadays, if a man is violently abusive, other men will say, yeah, well, that's a bit of a problem, right? And even the way they say it is almost like the way I just said it. That's a bit of a problem, not like a big problem, not like an extreme problem. But the average man who also observes it does nothing about it at all. They have no reaction towards those men who treat other women badly. They don't help those men address any emotion that causes them to do these things. And so that fundamentally believes you're in agreement. Because otherwise you would do things you'd observe a problem and you say, oh, we need to collectively fix this problem, And so it's very tricky passing while you believe you don't have the problems you do have. Right? And this is why, you remember she said her husband who killed her was still in hell. That's why he's still in hell. Because he still does not see that he has a problem.
And that was what she said as well was her problem when she passed, wasn't it? She had all these beliefs that she thought were reality. She didn't think they were a problem, but they were causing problems.
Yeah. Now, of course, it's a lot easier when you're the oppressed person to deal with your problems than it is when you're the oppressee. Is it that the right?
Oppressor.
Oh, sorry, the oppressor. The oppressor. When you're the oppressee, you generally are more aware that there was a problem, or you become more aware sooner. But when you're the oppressor, it takes a lot longer to become aware. So quite often what happens is a woman who might pass with the same sort of set of circumstances what Sage passed might experience, like a few hundred years before she reaches the, if she's even with God, before she reaches the position the sage is in now. But a man who has done those things quite often will take a few thousand to do the same thing, right? Because he wants to be less aware. To actually abuse someone else, you must believe you're righteous doing it. You have a right to do it. You've got to believe that. And the fact that you believe you have a right to do it is already much, much worse condition than accepting it, even as on the receiving end. So there's something men need to address, and we noticed it a lot our last trip. Almost every country we went to, there was a large amount of oppression from the men towards the women attending our presentations. And many of them were saying things, even in their questions and comments, that were direct indications that there would be problems. Like some women were saying, I let her do that. Things like that. I let her go there. She wanted to go there, so I let her. What do you mean you let her? You have no right to let her do anything. She has complete autonomy from God's perspective. You don't let her do anything. She does it or she doesn't. And you are either abusive, trying to control her, or you're not. There's no letting her. Letting her is still the idea of even letting her is abusive, right? The idea that I might let Mary do something is already abusive on my part.
It indicates a sense of ownership over my
Correct.
will, doesn't it? And
Correct.
That's where the problem lies.
It makes sense? So the whole idea that you're going to let your partner do something, well, it's already out of harmony with love to a large degree. And these, we had people not coming because they said in their emails, because my husband won't let me. Or my husband will be angry with me if I come. We had ones in the actual group doing that, saying that. And just a level of intense desire to control the beliefs and emotions of wives by their husbands is incredible. Most men have a very strong desire to control the belief systems of their wife and the emotions of their wife or the partner, in order that every bit of the wife or partner's intentions is directed at them positively. In other words, they want the wife to think they're a lovely guy. They want their wife to think they're caring, and they want their wife to think all these things. And as long as the wife does, as long as the partner does, they're happy. And if the partner thinks anything ill of them at all, even if it's accurate, the man's in a meltdown thinking he's being unloved. And that came across so many times in their way. Every single group that happened by lots of different relationships in every single group. And these are just problems that exist because of this long-term, long-standing domination by the male. Basically, it's physical domination by the male that's now extended into sexual, emotional, and spiritual domination of the woman by the male. Right? And many men, every single one of you have been born with it, without exception. Right? It's just the extent of it as to how far it goes with each of you will depend a bit on circumstances. But for many of you, given the right circumstances, you would consider either raping or murdering a woman. And many of you are not aware that that's how you feel. Right? And this is why sometimes women find it hard to be expressive around you too, by the way. Because many women can, if they're sensitive, they can feel that. Right? And then, because they can feel that, they then act in response, trying to control it, trying to mitigate it, trying to calm down those emotions.
Often by suppressing themselves.
Often by suppressing themselves. Emotionally and spiritually, firstly, and then eventually sexually and physically, suppressing themselves. And this is why it's well known on earth that many women have more sexual openness issues than men do. And it's quite plain why, if you think about it. So these problems are huge on the planet, you know, and they extend to almost every person we see. There's very few exceptions. There's some, but it's very, very uncommon. Yeah. In a group of 100 men, you might get one or two maybe who don't have those feelings, you know.
Beliefs, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so it's just something to bear in mind. You want to ask that?
When Sage said that men find her yucky, and was that in relation to her expressing herself, like what her personality?
It was
and
even
just
before
wanting to
then, it's like,
control?
Yeah, I mean, she felt that her being herself physically, emotionally, and sexually, and spiritually, really, but she didn't have a strong sense of spirituality, that would be repulsive to a man. Yeah.
Yep.
That was her belief.
and to be
that
frank,
she
it is
passed with.
repulsive to many men. Most men on earth right now find it repulsive. Most men on earth would rather the woman do exactly what they want, the man wants, rather than the woman express what she wants and feels and so forth.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. Any woman who has been very, what I'd call conciliatory and pandering to men, every man believes she's the most wonderful woman on earth, right?
And if
But
she,
any woman who's saying, "No, man, you're got
There's
problems,"
problems.
and how do the men feel then? Almost every man in that circumstance feels like he's not being loved.
she's
Right.
a problem woman.
She's a problem woman. She's just a bitch. Don't forget it. You know, or she's just got man issues. You know.
Yeah.
You know, that's the way most men look at it. And it can be the most benign of men who look at it this way. You know, many men that don't think they have a violent bone in their body would turn to a rape or a murder under certain circumstances if there was no law. In particular, if there was no law, they would turn to it under certain circumstances with a partner they really thought they cared about. Yeah?
So me acting in agreement with that
Very damaging.
and feeding that,
Very
that's
damaging.
what I have to look at as
That's right. And
sin.
what I noticed for many of you ladies, with Elias, you're feeding it. So he's like 4 years old now, isn't he? Swish? And most of you are feeding it in him at 4 years of age. Almost every one of your interactions with him is an addiction.
Put his worth above your
To put his
own.
worth above
You
your
put
own.
his demand above your own
So
work.
you're working away, he comes up, annoys you a bit, stops you from doing your work. What do? You stop your work, start talking to him, start engaging him, you're feeding the addiction there and then. He either joins you with your work or he leaves you alone. Right? But you're doing something completely different. Right? He only wants the attention because he can feel in you that you're going to give it. Right? And that you value a man more than you value yourself. Does that make sense? So, and you're doing it to a 4-year-old. What do you think you're doing to a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old who's got a very developed will in that direction? Yeah. Now, many of you are afraid, many of you ladies are afraid that if you do confront these issues, then the men will just get violent. And that is possibly true. They will possibly get violent because these emotions have been fed in them all their life. And I haven't seen a single man not get violent at some point or other through this breaking of these problems, right? But if you keep feeding it, you basically feed a monster. If you feed a monster, does it get bigger or smaller? Bigger.
And also, you know, a lot of times we're trying to stay in the denial of our own fears and our own feelings yucky about ourselves, or our own, and that's why we do it. That's, you know, we're trying to stay blind to our own feelings about ourselves, but also we're trying to stay blind to the beliefs and the feelings that already exist in the men around us.
It's actually even worse than that, because many of the feelings of the men of you can say of your generation are towards yourself, right? And you feel bad about them. But then when you have a child, you think, I'm going to create a man who doesn't have those feelings. So I'm going to invest more of my energy in this little tacker and put more of my time and energy into this little tacker because I'm sick of this man that I'm living with doing this kind of stuff to me. And he's unchangeable. He doesn't want to change. But I can modify and mould this young boy child into being a different type of man, but not understanding that all this time and energy and investment that you're putting into him is actually going to cause exactly the same problem to a worse degree than the other man you're living with has it, right? And he's going to think he doesn't have it more because mum approved. He's actually going to think he doesn't have it when he does. At least with a lot of men who turn out to be violent, at least to some extent they can see I am violent towards a woman, right? But these guys who are now being brought up, these young fellows who are now turning into adults, many of them don't understand how violent they actually are towards women because their mothers have favoured them all their lives. Right? And they have no idea how extreme it is. And they think they're nice fellas. And they have it even to a worse degree than the previous generation of men had it. Right?
And the more that we pander to that, the less it gets exposed to them and to us.
Mm.
I think that beautiful way that you conveyed Sage's lightness and freedom and delight and playful.
Yes, she
That
felt
was
so
beautiful.
free. And when she talked about freedom, I had the benefit of feeling her feelings about that. And the process of forgiveness and how freeing she found that. It was quite, it was impactful for me emotionally to feel how liberated she felt by forgiving.
She's no longer bound by men's feelings.
Feels like that.
So she can do whatever she wants.
And feel good about
And feel good
herself.
about it.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing.
Yes. And she feels a lot less. It was sort of like the feeling of her feeling dragged down by the sadness and the fear and the resentment and all of the things that she had held on to until that point. And then letting them go, feeling like, oh, wow, I can love and I can create and I can move forward and all these feelings,
Yeah, and your definition of love towards men changes then. So instead of thinking you're loving the guy by pandering to him, you now know you're loving the guy by not pandering to him and being yourself, right? And whatever he has to cope with, you encourage him, he can cope with it, right? But he doesn't need your help to do it. You don't need to nurse him doing it. See, most mothers are teaching their sons that their sons are going to be nursed out of every single bad emotion they have, right? And that's a terrible thing to teach somebody because you end up crippling them, emotionally crippling them. So what I see a lot is men who are walking around and are emotional cripples. They're like 2-year-olds emotionally. They're crippled by how they've been encouraged and brought up societally by their dads and their mothers. But because mums have a lot more time than with children than dads generally in our societies, a lot of times it's the mums have played a big part in doing it because of her fears and her worries about men as well.
Yeah, thank you. Like Penny's dropping a little bit more.
Yeah.
I was thinking, isn't that the same with dads and daughters?
Yeah.
Because I guess I have taught
Although most dads have an attitude of sexual possession of their daughters. So it's more of an oppressive attitude that most dads have towards their daughters than it is that most women have towards their sons. So most women with their sons are creating a sense of freedom in their sons, whereas most dads with their daughters are creating a sense of oppression with their daughters.
Even if they inflate their sort of sense of their worth in their daughters, it's still very...
there's always a sexual element to it generally.
Yes, and it's still very contractual with dad.
Yeah.
Only if you meet these certain things do you get to feel worthy.
Only
and
if you agree that dad is good. Only if you agree that dad is great, that he's nice, he's the best man in the world, he's the most favoured man, he's more favoured than your husband is.
He's better
that kind
than
of
any
thing.
man.
Then she gets to feel good, but if none of those things are true, then dad comes down on her like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. And the withdrawal of dad's approval then can be quite devastating.
Correct.
Whereas Often we see young boys being raised without any sense of oppression or contractual kind of, they can feel what they want about mum, dad, whoever.
In the end, they can even beat their mothers up and all sorts of things. They can go to jail and mum still thinks they're the best person on earth. They can do anything they want, including rape other women and all sorts, and mummy still believes they're the best man on earth and it was always the other woman's fault. Yeah. So that's very different than the relationship between men and their daughters. With men and their daughters generally, as long as the daughter looks up to daddy, daddy's happy and then makes the daughter feel happy, and there's a codependent addiction there. But as soon as daughter no longer looks up to daddy, then all things are off. So, if you think about it with your own daughter, if she started thinking, Dad, you got this problem, you got that problem, you got this problem, and she started telling you got that problem, and she started saying, I don't want to see you much because you got this problem, how would you then feel? Right? You can see that it would be a very different relationship if you started seeing these things, right? Yeah. And this is the thing for men to understand, really, that while often men believe, it's all the same with mothers and sons and fathers with daughters, but it's not actually. There's still the underlying dynamic, even with fathers with daughters, that there is an oppressive dynamic to it.
That the man has more worth. Yeah.
Jade?
We're at Amy.
Oh, sorry, we're at Amy. Yep.
Yeah, it's a similar question, but the dynamic being having female parents and female daughters and how that sort of dynamic might play out.
Well, that depends a lot, doesn't it, upon the female parents. So let's say a lesbian couple who have a daughter. It depends a lot on the beliefs of both mothers, you could say, both parents, the beliefs of those parents towards men and towards their daughter as to what's going to happen in terms of what feelings the daughter's going to end up feeling. Does that make sense?
So if both mums, for example, carry the belief that, well, they're sexually attracted to women, but men are still more worthy, then the daughter's likely going to end up with that same belief, even though she's been raised by two women. Yeah. If both mothers are in a rage with men, then the daughter is still going to have the belief that men are more worthy, because the rage is really as a result of a rebellion against that belief in the mothers. So,
in other words, the mothers are sick of pandering to men. Now they're in a rage, but they still fundamentally believe they have to pander, because if they didn't believe that, they wouldn't be in a rage.
They wouldn't have to fight against
that
urge.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have to fight against the urge by being angry.
Yeah. Or fight against the pain of having been oppressed by men. Yeah. So, yeah.
And Jade, we were at.
You were saying earlier about how we can't just stop the behaviour. So, like in my position, I've got these issues and I've got these issues.
Yep.
When I'm interacting with women, or ever have a feeling like I'd like to be friends or that sort of thing.
Yep.
I can't just stop it.
Yeah, what we see with a lot of you guys when we point these things out, you're trying to sort of curtail your feelings in some ways with the interactions, is what we see, right? And fundamentally, until the emotion is out of you, you're not going to be able to curtail it.
Yeah.
And the feelings are going to be the same. And by the way, women are generally more sensitive to feelings than men are, particularly at the beginning of their life. And so the women are going to feel, oh, that person just feels a bit dangerous to me, or that person feels a bit sexually sleazy to me, or whatever. They'll feel these things. But most women are willing to overlook it because they've been taught to, without saying anything. And in fact, most men treat them as if they don't overlook it, then they're not very nice women. Yeah. In fact,
you're back to being a bitch then.
You're back to being a bitch again.
Yeah.
So it's like for most women, unless they, even if a man is, say, sexually sleazy with them, unless the woman feels that she cannot say that to him. She feels that she's just got to go, oh yeah, okay, and just try to get away from him and just try to maneuver away and just try, if she feels uncomfortable. Sometimes they don't even feel uncomfortable. But if she does, she'll try and maneuver away and try to get out of his company or whatever and just give him a few compliments and get out of his vicinity. But that's all just feeding the addiction as well. And most men expect that. And when they don't get that, they get pretty incensed about it, actually.
Yeah.
Right? So, to deal with this as men, you're going to need to actually work through some emotions. Now, that's going to be pretty tricky if you don't believe in dealing with emotions, or you don't even believe you have a problem with it. That's going to be pretty tricky. You're going to have to get through that to deal with these things. Now, it is true that some societies have more of it than others. So, if a society has had a very strong religious bent on men being superior, then that society will be even more extreme. So an example of that is most Muslim societies and most Christian societies. Both of them have had a very strong religious bent that the man is the head of the household and therefore more important than the woman. He has more to say, more. So we're talking pretty much every European country, pretty much America, pretty much Australia a bit less so because there's not a lot of religion here anymore, right? But there's a lot of other religious places, but even here in Australia, it's a pretty strong attitude. When you go to, say, Muslim countries as well, very strong attitude because of the religious indoctrination that God agrees with it. So men have even gone one step further and said, it's not just my feelings, it's God's feelings too. There's so much justification of the bad emotions towards women to the extent that most men believe it's a God-given right. Right? And you've got more than one half of the entire world. When I say one half, not by numbers, I mean one half of the entire world sort of geographically. More than one half of the entire world has this religious indoctrination. And then you've got religions such as the Hindu faith and the Buddhist faith, which also look up to men more than it looks up to women, right? And so those faiths, even that don't have a connection to God's as much, still have a feeling that men are more important than women. And so you see countries that are based on those philosophies, such as India and so forth, those kind of countries also have severe problems with how women are getting treated. It's an epidemic on earth.
But Jad, really your question is, well, what should I do? Should I just not interact with women?
Like in the interim, while I've got the issues.
It's really saying, what should I do while I delay dealing with these emotions?
That's right. That's what you're asking, really.
Yeah. You're saying
there's
I
a
can't-
desire in you to delay dealing with it.
Yep.
And you're saying, but do I just stop having interaction with women while I deal with it? No, the best course of action would be to set an intent that's sincere to deal with it now, like from today, not put it off.
Because you
It's interfering with your relationship with God.
It is, big time, big time. It's interfering with your happiness now and in the future, and your potential soulmate relation. It's interfering with so much of your experience of yourself. It's dominating your life.
Most men can't do something without a woman approving.
Or a woman being engaged with them sexually, or a woman giving them praise, or a woman, it's actually a dependency, even though it's based in a feeling.
I feel like completely hollow, like empty without it.
I understand.
It's like I can barely function.
Yeah. But so you have the benefit of some awareness of the problem. You're more honest than most men that we know about the problem. Even if it's even just intellectually acknowledging you've got the problem. You are even sensitive to some of the effects of the problem, but you're still making excuses for yourself to deal with the cause of the problem. And so any question you ask, how should I interact with women? It's all really just saying, well, given that I'm not going to deal with the cause of the problem, how can I do the best I can? So we can't answer the question.
Well, we can. We say get more sincere and actually want to deal with the problem.
Develop the desire.
And work through why you don't have the desire to. Because that's a lot about not wanting to go through some pain, some emotional pain, and also some belief-based pain, because there's a lot of false beliefs attached to it too. And there are spiritual beliefs and emotions that need to change. That there's pain associated with those beliefs and emotions. And most men don't want to deal with them, and most don't on earth. I had many acquaintances in the first century, Peter being one of them, that never dealt with it on earth, and arrived in the hells of the spirit world and had to deal with it there. Peter even felt justified raping my own wife after I passed, shortly after I passed too, it was only a day or two, right, in his rage, and he felt justified doing it.
That was only because, and even it was me, not it was. He didn't even see me as me.
No.
He saw me as your wife.
Not
and
even
so
that, he didn't
therefore-
even see you as that. He just saw you as a thing that he just was angry with and knew
That's what I
he'd
mean.
deal with it
Someone who he
one way or
needed
the
to
other,
dominate. Yeah.
you know. And this is a man who proclaimed to be following me,
To love you.
to love me, right? So it's just, like I said, it's a very, very severe problem on earth that needs to be addressed. Now, you did ask how, and how is quite simple. Firstly, there needs to, remember we said earlier about prayer, there needs to be desire that's sincere within a person before any change will occur.
Yeah.
To have a desire that's sincere to change this requires you being prepared to feel any emotion you need to feel by yourself in order to get through this.
And if you remember, Jad, I've spoken to you in the past about measuring the pain of your current faith, and I talked about it this morning as well, with the start today. You know, at the moment your faith is still largely in, if I get these addictions met, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And you're not measuring really that you weren't happy even when you got some of them met, and that you're terribly dependent. You feel dependent. You're not dependent, but you feel dependent on getting them met for your happiness. So you need to break down this faith by measuring your pain and build faith in the better possibility that will require you dealing with any emotion that you have to get to that place where you feel women are your equal.
Yeah. Now, ironically, Jad, you also feel that you've got it to a terrible degree, right?
Yeah.
Now, while that may be the case, the real issue is you are now facing it. The average man in this room is not facing it, right? So you're ahead of the game by just coming to become aware and facing it is ahead of the game. And you now see it's a problem, which is also very good. The average man in this room does not. You have many men of your age in this room who have just as severe, if not more severe, there's a couple with more severe problems than you actually, who believe they don't have a problem at all. Right? So this is something to be aware of that. So the first part of change is becoming aware of how severe the problem is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And that's a painful part.
It's
It
painful.
is a painful part. And
Yeah, it feels bad.
it feels really bad.
And you've got to be prepared to go through feeling bad. You remember you got God. So this is one thing that you're forgetting, Jad. You got God.
Yeah.
That can help you go through these feelings, and God will be able to share with you where you're out of line and whatever. And you've got God to help you. So you've got spirit friends who want to help you. You know I do. You know I want to help you. We've already had conversations about this, you and I. You know I want to help you. You've got plenty of help around you. It's just whether you're prepared to go through the feelings to change it.
Yeah.
At the moment, you're still in a bit of a tantrum about it.
Yeah.
Now you've got to get prepared to go through the feelings to actually change it. Now, most men older than you are in a worse place than you are right now. And many of the men of the same age, like I said, are also in a worse place. So because you now are facing it, which is very good, you're asking questions about it, very good. You're
willing to
facing
open,
it you're trying to look at your addictions in this regard, very good. So you're already doing a number of things that are very good. The issue that you face right at the moment is that you're still not prepared to actually feel the desperate feeling.
Yeah.
Because you almost feel like you want to kill yourself rather than feel the desperate feeling, right? So you've got to get prepared to just feel the desperate feelings you have without taking any terrible action towards yourself and without harming yourself and without harming others. Right? You've got to be prepared to just go through the emotions. That's all you need to do. You can go through them very quickly with God's help. You can ask God for forgiveness and go through these things very quickly if you're sincere. But the average man is so insincere that he doesn't even want to know he has them. Right? And that's why most men on earth do not receive a lot of God's love. It's a rare man on earth who receives a lot of God's love for that reason.
I feel like anytime I do try to pray, this is the very first thing that's like, you're not, well, I guess it feels like I'm not feeling bad enough about this yet, and I guess that is true.
Not feeling sincere enough about it is what God means,
Yeah, and not feeling the the full problem yet. You know,
Yeah.
there's still a part of you that's justifying the sin,
Yeah.
and that's what God's trying to show you. Hang on, Jad, you got to see it
And
really
there's still a
as the problem.
desire for the sin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You still would like women to do it.
Yeah.
You still want women to give you a G up, to give you sexual energy, to make you feel good about yourself as a man. You want women to do it still, and that's what's going to have to be deconstructed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And let's come down to Nikki, kind of. So just a continuation, Nikki, of the same.
Thanks, guys. I know you've been saying it to me as well. So
Yeah.
the problem
Yeah.
is, you know how like Sage was saying that part of her process is actually feeling her terror of the response and stuff, like, and the women would feel the terror from the men.
Yeah.
Like, I was just feeling about that, and like, I just a massive fear. Okay, I don't know if this is true. I want to find out.
Yeah.
Like, I just feel so scared. Like, a man's gonna just like, if I change it, that
the men around you.
the men are just gonna just.
Well, that's partly why men do it.
And I'm just So
But
I
it's
didn't
not the
even know.
only reason.
No, it's not.
No.
Because the other reason is because my mum said I was great all the time, and
Well, no, because you now want that.
yeah,
It's not
It's
because
not
your mum
what
did
your
it.
mum
Like,
does.
like your mum could do it, and you could say, "Mum, don't do that anymore." It's not true.
Yeah.
But you wanted it, and you
Yeah.
thought it was true. So
Yeah.
that's the real issue.
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to have to address. And that's a bigger issue than your fear of the men. But the fear of the men can be an excuse, can't it? It's like there's a lot of men who think I'm insipid because I value Mary as much as I value myself, right? But do I listen? Do I have to listen to them? I don't, do I? Yeah. So
And anyone who knows Jesus knows he's not very insipid. I don't think insipid is under either of our names in the dictionary.
I know that. Like,
yeah. But it's interesting how many men are condescending to me because I treat women with equality. In fact, most men feel that I treat women with
Deference.
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 I prefer women
Yeah.
over men.
And treat them as more worthy.
Yeah. Not true. I have just as many celestial friends that are men as I do women. Right? Just on earth, it's very hard to be friends with men who have a desire to harm women.
Yeah.
Very hard. And the more you come in alignment with God as a person, you will find it's very hard to maintain friendships with men who don't change on this issue.
Yeah. And part of the woman side of it is like, is it feeling like the shame and guilt of like that you've done that stuff? Like, is that
done what stuff?
Yeah, the way I've treated women, oppressing them.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that; it's also feeling all the effects of it. Like, if you think about your relationship with Bex, right? What are the effects upon Bex from that relationship? You still have no idea what they are, because there've been a lot. That's the relationship we've observed with you, and there's been a lot of effects on her that we see in her right to this day that she still hasn't really addressed because of what you did. And also for you, Nikki, you are wanting spiritual control of her, which is actually the worst kind of control that you can exert over a person. It's worse than sexual control, worse than emotional control. Spiritual control is trying to make the woman believe what you believe.
Yeah.
Right? Now, many men have created whole religions for that purpose. Well, you look at the Christian religious faith, for example, and the Muslim faith, both created by men, right? And look at the primary teachings relating to women, which are all about women are in subjection. Why do you think the men came up with that? Because it's not what I taught. So I didn't teach that in the first century. So how did they come up with it? They came up with it because they wanted it. They wanted control of women, and they wanted to make it a spiritual level of control, because if a woman believes she's obeying God by doing it, there's this extra shame that she will feel when she breaks the man's desires, right? Yeah. There's this extra shame that will be attached to her disagreeing with the man's desires. And men know that. Men have known that for hundreds of thousands of years now. Men have known that, and so this is why they've constructed belief systems that are in preference to the man and at the detriment to women in order to gain spiritual control over women. It's the worst type of control that you can have over a person, is to control their beliefs. And
because you're basically trying to impact them in ways that your soul is very, you're trying to manipulate their morality. You're trying to manipulate their connection to the conscience. You're trying to
how they love.
Use shame to control them because they feel it's a sin if they don't believe as you believe, or
Yep.
So they're very core parts of a person that you're trying to act upon.
Yeah. And also all of those false beliefs have big emotional impacts as well. So what I notice is that there's some men that just want physical control of a woman.
Go here, be there.
Go there, be
wear
here,
this.
do that.
Yeah.
My dad's a lot like that. Go here, do that, do this, do that. But my dad also wanted sexual control of a woman, emotional control of a woman, and spiritual control of a woman. And he still does. He is doing all of them. In sexual control, we have sex when I want to. If I can't have it, then you can't. I'm not going to pleasure you if I can't have it, that kind of thing. And then there's also emotional control, don't feel that woman. No, now you're getting too emotional for me. Go to bed. Those are my dad's comments. Spiritual control. Oh, you don't believe what I believe. There's something wrong with it. You don't agree with me about my beliefs about God, so there's something wrong with you. You don't believe in my choice of religion. There's something wrong with you. And my mother has experienced that from my father all of her life, as well as obviously from her father. Yeah. Now, most women are in that position where they've experienced that, and my mother thinks her life is completely normal, absolutely normal. And I suppose in some ways it's normal hell. It's normal hell, isn't it? Really, to have someone control you to that level, that's hell. You're in prison, but the person doesn't even think they're in prison because there's no bars. All the bars are being created through your belief systems being manipulated and your emotions being manipulated. Right?
Yeah, so Nikki, I think that, as Jesus said, they're the things to really seek God's feelings about those things. Because you do have a tendency of wanting to just, feel guilty and beat myself up, but you don't even know what you're guilty of at this point.
I get sometimes feelings.
Well, only
about what's
inspired,
Yeah.
from spirits around you or whatever telling you.
In order to repent for your sin, you have to know your sin.
Mm.
You have to know what's wrong about it.
And you haven't even wanted to know it.
No.
Yeah. But it's a major imposition to your relationship with God. You're not going to be able to have a relationship with God while you have these attitudes towards the opposite gender. Just not going to be able to.
It's a big way that you're out of harmony with God's truth and God's love.
Yeah. And by the way, your attraction is like the opposite gender, right? You know that. You know that's your soul. Your soulmate's one of the opposite gender. What do you think she's feeling with all this? Complete rejection.
Yeah.
So you're there trying to choose who your soulmate is and try to be with them, but at the end of the day, your actual soulmate, Scott, is in a state of complete rejection by you. You understand? So you think you're going to be happy one day with a woman, but how can you be if these emotions are coming out of you at any point? Yeah. Now, when I speak about it quite firmly, and the reason why I do is because it's such a severe issue on the planet.
Well, the thing is, the sad thing is that if you spoke to me gently about it, I'll just dismiss the thing.
Of course.
So you have to be.
As we've observed.
Yeah.
But I'm still being gentle. I'm not being abusive of you or anything like that. I'm just pointing out some facts, and the reality is, if you hadn't have asked, I wouldn't have even pointed them out to you. Actually,
yeah.
Unless I saw you in an actual interaction with a person. So sometimes you've experienced that, and sometimes Jad has too, where he's been in an actual interaction with a girl, and I've pointed it out in the moment because I'm there. And sometimes it's happened on my property. Of course, I have a responsibility to do it then anyway. But even if not, if we're in a group like this and I see a woman treating a man treating a woman or a woman treating a man badly, there's something that needs to be said. just because I'm responsible for the environment. And anytime I'm not responsible for the environment, I still feel like things need to be said under certain circumstances, depending on the severity of the problem, right? So it's a difficult situation, and quite often my comments end up with both the woman and the man being angry with me, because many women don't want to face what they're doing to be in the situation either, and they're frightened that if I say anything strongly about it, that they themselves will be in a more dangerous position with the man they're with, but at the end of the day it still needs to be said. Yeah. And in fact, hardly anything can change on earth between between men and women. Hardly anything can change unless this is dealt with. Yeah.
Yeah, can, and that's what Sage was saying. It's going to require some people who are
brave women, as well as brave men. Yeah. Yeah. To actually go through it,
and you're not going to be able to fake it, like, oh, I've forgiven, you know, like, oh, I've changed towards women, you know, or to women, oh, I've just forgiven, and you know, no, it's something real, and that's why she was saying it's going to require leaders, because you're going to have to grow the courage of a leader to actually deal with these issues on earth. But that's the only hope for the earth, to deal with these things, to change people's lived experience on earth.
There's so many times in so many situations Mary and I have been in where the man has said, we're leaving now. You're not spending any more time with those people now, that kind of thing. Yep.
We don't mind if anyone wants to leave our company, but when one person is dictating to another person how they use their will,
it's pretty off.
Pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. If I get through it, you'll be the first people I thank.
Well, we'll probably also be the first people to know. Because generally we can feel what's going on with the person. Anyway, but also at the moment, many of you guys don't feel thankful about even knowing about it yet. But you will in the future, because you don't realise the disservice you're doing even to yourself. Yeah. You're eroding your own sense of pride in yourself through doing this, and you're also eroding. See, God. You can feel God's approval when you do things or don't do things through the conscience. So you're actually eroding any sense of approval from God as well through what you do, and so there's a lot of things that are being undermined internally, as well as your future relationships with women are being undermined as well. So many of you guys would like to have a sexual relationship with a woman, yeah? But, and many of you are addicted to having a sexual relationship with women, but most of you are unwilling to deal with the reasons why women generally, over time, end up feeling less attracted to you. When I say over time, they might initially be attracted, but once they realise that you've got all these feelings, and they can feel all those feelings, and they feel them being acted out upon over and over and over again, after a few years of that, most women are going, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. Yeah. So it's even to your own detriment with having a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I've lived all those painful effects of it, the compensation of that. And I've tried all these excuses, and it's like, well, I'm still the same.
True, but you haven't tried going through the hard emotion.
No, that's the only thing I've not tried.
And also, can you see what I was saying to Jad? Those emotions, to most men, feel like death is better than dealing with those emotions. Yeah. Most men would rather die than deal with them. And most men do die rather than deal with them.
And that's also why you made the comment that many men don't understand the latent violence within them, because a lot of men either become violent towards themselves or towards women when they come up to these emotions.
Correct.
So this is why.
So they suicide because they're not having relationships or whatever, or
a lot of men kill their wives,
kill
their children, and themselves. You know, they don't want to deal with these emotions so much, and a lot of men come up to these feelings and feel, I cannot bear the thought of giving up this addiction, so I must get sex even if I force it, even if I rape someone. So this is...
And if prostitution didn't exist on earth, the problem would even be probably worse in a lot of ways.
And a lot of you guys don't.
Because a lot of men overcome these rages with the prostitute rather than with their partner.
That's right.
Yeah.
And another tricky thing that you need to recognise is your emotional violence. So a lot of you don't resort to physically overpowering women, but you do use a lot of emotional manipulation techniques in order to
and
get...
spiritual manipulation.
Yes.
Like,
a lot of manipulative techniques that are violence, that if the woman developed and stood up to them, then would be exposed to just how desperate you are to get that sexual engagement.
Yep.
Oh, Mary, you're just emotional now.
Yeah.
Well, like
the withdrawal of
that
attention, approval. You're fat. You're frigid. You're
Well,
what's wrong with you?
Like I've done Divine Truth longer than you have.
Yes.
I know better. Yeah.
Yes. I'm just telling you the truth.
Yep.
When really you're undermining the woman.
Yeah.
These kind of
That kind of
things.
stuff.
Yeah.
Like prayer is so important right now in this place where it's like, well,
God's opinion.
what's God's feeling about this? Like,
yeah, God feels more strongly than I do about it.
Yeah. Seek out God's opinion. Yeah.
I'm barely expressing any part of God's feelings about it at this stage, in terms of the strength of those opinions. Yeah. Which is why there's a lot of men who stick around in hell for a long time. It's the primary reason, in fact, why a lot of men stick around in hell longer than many women do.
thank you.
Yeah. We can go to cure that problem. There'll be a lot more men enjoying the freedom of growth, as there are, and would be women as well. Because as Sage shared, it also affected her own concept of self, her own desire to grow, her treatment of herself. And many women do have learnt to treat themselves badly, unfortunately. So many of you ladies are very tolerant of bad treatment towards yourself because you've learned to treat yourself badly now because of the constant treatment. And so what you think is normal is not even normal. Yeah. Now, of course, it doesn't apply to everybody, but it's fairly global problem.
Pretty sad, eh?
Mm. Yeah. And the main reason why a lot of men never experience soulmate love on earth is because of this problem. And it's also a lot of reason why many people on earth do not have a closer relationship with God. Yeah. Because most men dominate the spiritual landscape. And most men want to believe they are God in their family. And as a result of believing they are God, they are usurping God's authority with everyone in their family. And that usually means then that everyone in the family ends up either believing that daddy is God, you know, that daddy has to be believed, or rebelling against that. But either one, they're going to have a problem with God. Yeah. So it causes a lot of spiritual problems on earth as well, unfortunately. Problems relating to whether you'll accept God's truth or not.
Well,
or accept God even exists.
As Sage shared,
Mm.
she saw authority as male and
Yeah.
therefore abusive, really.
That's right. And so it's a very, very big problem on earth, and far bigger than the average person on earth believes. Most women know it's a problem, but they only sort of see it almost as a physical and sexual one. And they barely see it as an emotional and spiritual one. But it's much more severe emotionally and spiritually than it is sexually and physically. So, in fact, a lot of men fake sexual care and physical care while at the same time manipulating the woman spiritually and emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a violent power thing over women that is going on. I see a lot of men nowadays go, well, I don't beat women, I don't hurt women, I haven't never hurt a woman, I've never laid never raised a finger towards a woman ever in my life. But emotionally and spiritually, there's this constant stream of basically manipulation and abuse. Yeah. So we go to Nina.
So in the spirit world, how long are the sexes sort of kept separate by this injury, and at what point can
to the fifth sphere?
you actually spend time together. Yeah.
Well, you spend much like you do on Earth, you spend time together.
You guys all spend time with each other, but you're not connected with each other.
You're not really relating.
Yeah, fifth sphere. That's when most people, as actually Sage said, if you heard it properly, you would listen to it again. She actually said that a lot of her injuries relating to the opposite gender were dealt with in the fifth sphere.
Yeah, I kind of wondered, because that's when you said you know who your soulmate is.
Yeah,
And so.
well, you know, if you deal with them, you'll know. This is quite simple why we don't know. It's because we haven't dealt with those injuries. And so, yeah, it's it's very important to realise that there's going to need to be quite a lot of progress. And you imagine if everyone on Earth was in the fifth sphere, we wouldn't be having wars, would we? Not anymore.
We're having a lot more sex.
Yeah. There'd be a lot more happiness and joy.
I mean, like good sex.
Yeah. But it would also be like, not just sex, but also like camaraderie. You know, friendship. You sort of see a lot nowadays, like there's a baby shower. Who attends?
Women.
There's a boating, event. Who attends?
Men.
If there's a car event, who attends? Men, mostly. But there's a like a new age type of interesting thing about spirituality.
Retreat.
Who attends? 90%. You know, and the 10% of men who attend are usually preying on the women who attend. Right? So. You know, if you look at most spiritual circles, what's happening? Men are preying on women. How many women gurus are there compared to men gurus? How many women are accused of sexual abuse of children or of men compared to how many men are accused of it? It's just rife in our society. And what surprises me a lot is that it's rife in our society, yet the average man you meet thinks he doesn't have a problem. How does that happen? If something's rife in society, how can it be the average man's not got a problem?
Or we're supporting it as women.
That's right.
Yeah.
So yes, it takes a fair while in terms of progress to work through the problem fully, but by the time you're equivalent of the third sphere, you would already have worked through it greatly. You know, like you'll finalise the problem in the fifth sphere.
Or even she was sort of saying in the transition to the fifth sphere, you dealt with a lot of your intergender issues then. It's
so
just
fourth sphere, you deal with a lot of your intergender issues. By the time you reach the fifth, you're fundamentally, by the time you're reaching this fifth, you are in the process of final resolution of a lot of these problems.
Which makes you ready then to receive God's truth about soulmates emotionally and about,
and also ready to actually have a good relationship. Even if your other part is in the hills. Can we go to Elena next? Anna?
Yeah, I did want to ask about Sage and Harry and why she was just cool with being friends with him. She didn't have any demands on him at all. Like, yeah. Why is that? Just because of her condition, or she didn't have addictions with men?
You say she was cool.
It wasn't like, Harry's there. She was quite passionate about Harry.
She was pretty interested in Harry.
Not just like mate.
She wasn't mad at him that they weren't banging, you know, like friends.
Well, not mad at him, no. Obviously she knows the potential of their relationship far more than he does at this point. Because he's in the fourth sphere and she's in the seventh, and she's dealt with a lot of things that he is now having to deal with, right? But it doesn't mean she knows that she's attracted to him, she knows she's interested in him, but she also knows that having a close sexual relationship with him at this point before he's dealt with those particular things is going to just cause a lot of issues. Does that make sense? For him as well as herself.
But she does feel the gift of him. You know, that was really lovely to feel. She feels he's a
gift from God.
Gift from God in her life, and she enjoys him, and she enjoys feeling her sexual attraction for him, even though they can't bang it.
Even though she can't fully express it, because she has to really, if she loves herself, she has to really wait for him to deal with certain things till he's in a point where he's and that'll probably be more like the fifth sphere, till he's in a point where he's dealt with a lot of the issues himself. Because if you start engaging a sexual relationship with somebody who doesn't understand the issues involved with the relationship, you are going to have to go through a lot of turmoil in order for that relationship to continue, right? And the average person in the seventh sphere is not prepared to go through that turmoil because of their love of self.
Okay, don't really understand, but I can listen another time.
Well, she doesn't feel needy for this.
Yeah, she didn't feel needy at all.
No.
And I don't really like the concept of soulmates, but I feel like that if I found out who my soulmate was tomorrow,
You'd be like,
yeah, I'd be so hella needy.
You'd be like a leech.
Yeah. Ellie, I can't do it.
Hella leech, you'd be a leech. Damn, Jesus.
Sorry about that. But that's how most
true.
people are
That's
when
true,
they
yeah,
consider the concept of soulmates. They
Yeah.
find a soulmate, leech on them. And that's not, if you love them, you wouldn't ever do that. Yeah.
Yes, I remember somebody saying that they knew who their soulmate was and they weren't going to go towards them because they hadn't worked through their issues with men and it wouldn't be the right thing to do. And I just remember my jaw dropping. And I just thought, wow, what an ethical woman. Like,
Yeah. Well, many of you have what I would classify as a very flawed romanticized, and many of you don't understand romance at all, but you have a flawed romanticized, a sinful romanticized view of soulmates. And it's very flawed and also not romance. True romance is based upon desire and passion and not based upon need and demand.
You complete me. That kind of feeling is not that. The whole oh, he sees me and knows me and it makes me feel safe, and that's romance. None of that.
You almost watch every romantic movie nowadays. That's what they say, isn't it? Like, oh, he makes me feel so. This makes me feel like I can be myself. He makes me feel. She makes me feel. He makes me feel.
That's why I love you. You make me feel.
yeah, or you in the movies, the guy will beat up some guy that was in danger to her, and then it's like that's love.
Isn't he wonderful?
Yeah,
He protected me.
Yes.
He made me feel safe.
Yeah.
None of that is romance.
Even I knew a couple that wasn't associated with divine truth, and they had this thing when they got together that they didn't want to need each other, and they seemed like one of the more stable couples I'd ever met. Yeah.
But that would be an intellectual attempt
Yes.
to act upon a desire to act out something rather than be something.
Sort of a principled decision.
Yeah.
If I've got to try not to need Mary, then I still need it.
Okay, gotcha.
It's not the ultimate freedom of feeling I don't need them. I just want them.
Thanks.
And also a lot of people try not to do things because they're afraid of doing them. That doesn't help either. So if I'm trying not to need Mary, then it means that I'm afraid of actually desiring Mary. And the emotion not being reciprocated.
It's sort of like the Buddhist idea that desire is the problem. No, addiction is the problem. Desire is
unloving desires are the problem, which are addictions. So, a lot of these intergenerational problems are caused by unloving desires. They develop generally while you're being, during development in childhood, but also a lot of times they're not even present in childhood, but they develop during your sexual development period, during puberty, and then they are then acted upon after that. And, a lot of those things happen sometimes because of earlier events in childhood, but a lot of times events happen during puberty that cause certain things to occur. And this is what occurred to Sage actually during puberty, was when she started feeling sexual desire, and then she sort of felt that towards a certain person in her life, and he raped her. So he took advantage of
abused her.
So instead of going, oh, there's a girl going through puberty here, I'm not going to hurt her, I'm just going to talk to her about a desire or whatever, instead of doing that, he raped her and then damaged her desire. And that didn't happen to her before then, but there was a predisposition towards that occurring because of her relationship with her dad, which was very bad. So dad had this abusive treatment of women. All of her brothers had the abusive treatment of women. So she was, taught to accept abusive treatment as well. Pretty tough, eh? I don't know if we... I think we want to finish off now. It's about 5 or...
It's 20 past 5, you guys. It'll be dark outside.
So, but yeah, it's an important thing to discuss. Most people are not very open to discussing it you remember many of our discussions that we've had out at the kitchen table for many of you
In the
ladies who have
patio.
come along helping in God's way. Oftentimes there's been one man there and then me and then 8 women discussing this problem. What we really need more of is men willing to discuss the problem as well, because that would help greatly with solving the problem. You know?
Yeah, and deep levels of honesty with ourselves, whether we're a man or a woman,
Yeah.
about where we're at, and
Yeah.
deep desire to deal with whatever we've got to deal with in order
Yeah.
to love the other.
And I'm not anti-men, I'm a man. If I was anti-men, I'd be anti myself, and that wouldn't be very good. So I'm not anti-men. But I am aware of how bad the situation is for men, for many men,
Yeah,
and how much women feed it.
exactly.
So we need to, you know,
Jane, I think all of your brothers in the room feel how much you don't judge them, but
Yeah.
are firm with them.
Yeah.
You're not anti-men.
and often I get emails saying I am, and interestingly enough, I also get a lot of emails saying that I don't care for women Mary enough. But
Yeah,
so-
you can't.
They're in-
You're dominating me, and you hate
That's
men.
right.
And it's all You're just an abuser.
The only time I stop Mary from speaking is when I know for certain that her actions or her words or her emotions are out of harmony with God's way, and I must stop her.
And that, you know, this environment that we're in, I do respect Jesus' development. I haven't always, in this environment. I do, now. And I do feel that the most important thing for us to do in this setting is to convey God's truth to you. It's not about Jesus and I here.
No.
You know, this is about God's truth. And so... at this point, Jesus is more developed in reconnecting with our souls than I am.
Only because I've had a head start.
Yeah, and I hope to meet him in the development as time goes on. But certainly in our private life, there's no, what do you call that, muzzles on Mary, you know. But there has been times where I have, you know, publicly realised, oh, yeah, no, Jesus has given me the vibe that I'm not going the truthful way here, and I've stopped, you know, myself from speaking, or he's interrupted me speaking. And a lot of people perceive that as his control of me, or that he's somehow, I don't know, what is they say, dominating me, or brainwashing me, or
even
well,
just
all kind
not
of things.
giving the woman enough say type of thing.
That's right. But I feel like man or woman, if we're teaching God's truth, the most important say is God's truth, you know. And so
And you'll find more and more as Mary progresses more and more, there'll be times when I won't even come.
Won't that be good?
Because I know that she would say what I'd say anyway.
I'm joking. Okay. But I mean, it'd be nice sometimes for Jesus to just like rest when he needs to.
Yes.
Not just that, it's just also sometimes once we get to a stage where we're both on the same page with regard to all of God's truths, then fundamentally, when one's sharing the truth, the other one doesn't even need to be there. They can be sharing the truth with a different group of people, right?
But the reality is, Joe, we love doing this together, so we're going to do it.
Well, we enjoy each other's company, but...
But, you know, in Belgium, when Jay got really sick, when he was getting spirit attacked, you know, I did have a moment where I was like, wow, I wish I was more developed right at this moment, because I could say, babe, stay home, it's all right, I'll handle day one.
Yeah.
That time's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
No, that was good.